Welcome to episode 97 of Silver Lining for Learning. Again, we're your hosts. I'm Yong Zhao from University of Kansas and University of Melbourne. We got Dede from Harvard, Curt Bonk from Indiana University, and Punya Mishra from Arizona State University. It is shocking that the end of COVID has brought back more COVID. I was looking at the news. Hong Kong, got over anywhere between 20,000 cases to 50,000 cases in Hong Kong. China has locked down in many cities, and a lot of schools in China now have gone online again, have closed their schools. Now, of course, it's more shocking. We see the atrocities, the problems in the invasion of Ukraine. We disperse a lot of students as refugees. Their schools have to be closed. But I saw that in the news, there are teachers offering online. I also saw that there's an attempt to translate online courses into Ukrainian, so Ukrainian students can continue. So a lot of things happening, depressing, unhappy, but we're here again to talk about innovations in education and what we can do. This episode is the host reflect, and we're approaching our 100th episode. But in this one, we want to reflect on our last 4 episodes. Primarily, we learned from superintendents, what they have been doing. We've been learning from the deans, deans of schools of education, what their challenges have been and what innovations they've had. We also had 2 great, guests from Australia who have transformed their schools for personalized learning. So today we want to get started with whatever is on our mind from any of the hosts, and we'll also chat about what we will plan to do in the future. Chris, do you want to get started?
Just a second, Young, before we start, I think you missed the one on Palestine. That was also in the sequence. That was an excellent show. I mean, it's so impressive. And we're going to have some more global related shows coming up in the next couple of months. I just want to mention we should reflect on that one too.
Thank you, Curt. I thought that was before this, so my mistake. Thank you. Chris, go ahead.
Well, I realized that how I answer people's questions has changed because of Silver Lining for Learning. As I'm sure all of us, get many questions from students, questions from people who just happen to email, questions that come out in other contexts about this or that aspect of education or learning. And I've realized that for not all of the questions, but probably 2/3, I begin by answering, we had an episode related to that on Silver Lining for Learning. And then I describe the episode and send them a link and suggest that they take a look at it and say that I'll introduce them to the experts if they're interested in that. Now, that wasn't ever the purpose of Silver Lining for Learning. We weren't trying to construct kind of a Wikipedia of multimedia cases for education. And I don't think that our selection of episodes has been deliberate in terms of, coverage for every, conceivable type of educational issue. And yet, as I said, for about 2/3 of the questions, there's an episode that can be referenced. So that says to me that it's really helpful to have ideas that are chunked at about the 1 hour level. In other words, longer than reading an op-ed, shorter than taking a course, and with true experts involved in giving the answers. So I think that without, again, necessarily planning to do so, we've filled sort of a niche in the education ecosystem, or at least identified a niche in the education ecosystem that isn't adequately served, and done something that addresses this, with the hope perhaps that others will do other things that address this. And I think that's interesting. And again, we're doing it on a zero budget. And although we're volunteering time, I think all of us, busy as we are, have found that the time is worthwhile, that we're staying with it because we're getting a lot out of it. So I think that's interesting to think about the learning ecosystem, about education, and the niches that don't have much in them, and how SLL, at least in terms of ed tech, is a possible model.
Thanks, Chris.
So if I can follow up on that. So two things. So one, Chris, I remember one of the earliest conversations we had when we were thinking of, I don't know if it was faced like on Zoom or by email, when we were thinking of the name of what this would be. And I think the silver lining idea, the phrase, I think came from you, if I'm not mistaken. And honestly, at that point, when the pandemic was just starting and things were shutting down, I was not very sure that was the right title. And if you remember, like, the title sequence that I had this like dull foreboding music, had these dark clouds, which was sort of reflecting, I think, at least, if not the collective mood, but at least my mood at that time. But you're absolutely right that over time, to me, the silver lining piece has become more and more salient than necessarily the cloud, and that the guests that we have had and the examples and so on that we have had really have helped me think, for sure. Just looking at like the past, so making the connection to the past 4 episodes, I think that the episode on Palestine, and thank you, Curt, for reminding us that was one of the 4 since our last reflection, that is going to be in some way the future of learning for many, many children in the world, as we see the degradation caused by global climate change, as we see these internecine conflicts that are happening across the world. More and more children are going to be in these spaces which are, for want of a better word, war-torn or disrupted in ways. And so the courage and the sort of the initiative demonstrated by our Palestinian colleagues who joined us is going to be the story of many educators around the world. Zhao mentioned the Ukraine conflict as being one. And, we are going through, I think, historically a phase where we are going to see with the ravages of climate change, we are going to see a lot more migration and shifting of populations across the world. And it is not going to be easy for many children. So I think that episode in some way foreshadows, I think, some episodes that we might want to do in the future around this issue, because I think that's going to be a big issue. And technology is clearly going to play a critical role in how those children are educated, because physical spaces and so on might be at a premium, right? And then we had the 2 episodes with the superintendents and the deans, which is sort of how leadership is responding to these challenges. And in particular, and this is not to boost my boss, but I think that some of the ideas around the next education workforce and so on that ASU has been sort of investing in and putting their heart and mind into and time into, we had an episode specific to that as well. I think also speaks to sort of changes that would be coming up in the field of educator preparation and educator deployment, which I think are going to be important for us to keep following. And finally, the last episode with Peter and Michael, like, talk about silver lining, talk about a group of people who are really doing amazing things. And, in particular, giving sort of connecting back to the Palestinian issue is Michael's statement that you really don't need, for education to happen, it really needs thoughtful design rather than lots of money and a building and so on. And so I think that just sort of brings us full circle back to sort of the original point about teaching in situations which might be challenging and so on. And that ingenuity and creativity on part of the educators is going to be critical to that. So I think these 4 episodes hold together in a very interesting kind of way, with the Palestine, with the 2 around leadership, and then finally culminating in two individuals who are doing some amazing things in their schools and the broader system. So yeah, great.
Thank you, Punya. Curt, what's on your mind?
So first of all, I want to thank Punya for creating a nice graphic for next week. It looks really great. I'll introduce it later on in the show at the end. And I want to add to what Punya talked about with the Palestinian show. Really, what he forgot to mention that it was the overcoming so many challenges that we're going to have to see again. He kind of referred to it, but I think there were 4 or 5 things in the Palestinian show that were significant. It was savvy teachers who were innovating with their pedagogy despite the obstacles that they were facing and sharing with other teachers across the country and around the world. That really was impressive to me, and I'm sure for anyone watching that episode, they would be impressed with. It was not just that they were savvy with the limited uses that they had available to them, but they were sharing those so that others could, but that there was an optimism there. In spite of all the difficulties that they were facing, there was optimism. So in terms of how Young started out this episode, there can be optimism in spite of, and just the way Chris has labeled this, silver lining for learning, there can be optimism in the midst of all these tragedies. And there's some hopeful signs there. And also the leadership that was taking place in Gaza and around all parts of Palestine. I just found that whole show just phenomenal. It was one of our top 10 shows, I think. But there's 4 other things or 5 other things I want to mention. Guys, I'm really impressed with who you've brought in the past few months. And you've been holding out on us. We had some great shows the last few weeks, and you haven't told me about any of them in last year or the year before. And all of a sudden, all these great people are showing up. So if you got more such people to bring them in, because we're gonna have a couple months coming up here in the summer. We need to fill in some shows. So I hope this is a sign that 2022, our 3rd season, is gonna be even better than season 1 and season 2, because I am really impressed. And I agree with Chris. I'm starting to answer people in LinkedIn and Facebook with a link to one of our shows. One of my friends in Israel is talking about, these innovative learning environments for kids that they're designing. And I said, you need to look at last week in Silver Lining for Learning. I put the link in, and I said, she said right away she's going to watch it. That's in Facebook. In LinkedIn, I'm doing the same kind of thing. So the shows are starting to accumulate, and we have enough shows that we have done that there's a lot of niches that we fill. Not every niche. We have to think strategically, as Punya was pointing out pre-show before we got on today, about what niches we haven't filled and strategically think about those. But we have such a wide variety because of these last couple of months. These last couple of months, I think, has broadened it out in terms of getting the superintendents. For instance, we have not had many shows where superintendents were involved, or principals of schools, where we get their perspective. We have to think about other people's perspectives. And as I said last week, I'm going to teach a course on designing learning environments. I said to myself this morning, okay, what shows that we had in Silver Lining for Learning that I can tap into and utilize when I teach that course next fall? Who can I contact? Which of the 100 episode, well, this is episode 97, which of the episodes would be good to bring someone in that regard? So I'm starting to think the same way Chris is, and think about reuse of such content, maybe even remixing. I might have my assistant come and remix pieces of different episodes together to a video that has different snippets where people talk about learning environments in an interesting way. So I guess that's where I want to start off with today. Some optimism, some thinking about reuse, something about expansion, where we need to go from here, and just to say I'm very impressed with who you guys have been bringing in.
When Chris was said about his answers changed to questions, I was actually thinking about the breadth of guests and how we have been lucky. We have been lucky not to be rejected by anyone we issue an invitation to. You remember, we have some very well-known people who could charge you for several $1,000, $10,000 for an episode. We got a lot of those people. We also got a lot of people from places where you can't imagine, like we talk about, Palestine. It really, I have not been rejecting. I mean, deans, superintendents, well-known speakers, scholars. It's shocking. It's really amazing, right? So it shows a time that people are willing to share and to talk. I think this is quite amazing. I mean, if we tell them how many, how small a live audience we got, people say, God, what? I'm talking to 5 to 10 people, but they came. They came. All of them came for whatever reason. I'm very, very encouraged by that, and that is so. We have this great archive. We have this great archive of different stories. You know what? This every Saturday, it changes my mind, because all of us have been stuck in many ways, and I have never had a chance to interact with so many people from different places for an hour. That's such a blessing to me. I mean, thanks to my co-host, Chris, Curt, and Punya, you guys bringing people I would not be able to have access. So myself has felt like inspired and enlightened. And also the third point I want to make is that it is truly an honor to get the chance to see the silver linings in different places. It is everybody seems to be doing something, with or without money, with or without government support. I think that's amazing. I hope in the future we can bring in some government officials to make them be more aware of what we're doing. What I feel really bad right now is many governments are spending a lot of money because of COVID to recover from learning loss, to test students from learning loss, to get rid of online remote learning so they can place students in schools. And this is, I think, a lot of government officials, they want to do good, they mean to do good, but at the same time, they may not be so aware of what is good, because everybody's faced the immediate public reaction to them. We want schools, we want the children to be out of their parents' house, we want children to be, with each other, that kind of conversation. So maybe we should bring some government officials. Let's try to bring some from the federal government, the state governments, or from different countries to at least have a conversation with them to say, can policy change? Can policy shift? What can we do about that? I think that level of engagement we have not done. So I hope we can do something over there.
I think I could contact my contacts in Korea and see if we can get a high-level government official in the educational technology space. I had thought about this as well, Yong. Repeatedly, I've been thinking about it. Is anyone else?
Well, I want to pick up on what Punya talked about with where is education going globally, and how disrupted are many students, billions of students, going to be by the coming decades. And I think it's absolutely right that industrial models of education are very fragile at the present time. They're very vulnerable. The pandemic has revealed that. The global unrest and mass, migrations have revealed that. But the interesting contrast is, when I was young, informal learning was very fragile and actually quite difficult. I mean, other than the public library, there wasn't much. I taught myself calculus based on books in the public library. There weren't any MOOCs. There wasn't any, massive social media that could provide mentoring or anything of that type. Now, the informal learning environment is incredibly robust and powerful. And when we brought on people who were doing important work in education under difficult conditions, they're not doing important work by somehow shoring up the industrial era model. They're doing important work by drawing on things from informal learning like social media and dare I say it, remote learning, the evil empire of remote learning. So I just think that it's time to not only rethink the model of formal education, which all of us have been saying for decades, unfortunately to little effect, but to draw on the power of this informal learning model, which has been greatly strengthened by the pandemic, because there are now infrastructures in place for remote interaction that even if education doesn't take advantage of them in many instances, they're still there. They're not going to disappear. Business will keep them around. People will keep them around in their personal relationships. So there are opportunities, I think, to think about education in calm times, which might look pretty traditional, and education in disrupted times, which might look like a lot of what we're talking about on Silver Lining for Learning.
Punya, go ahead.
So I think the idea of getting, I'm just thinking of like future guests or episodes, right? So the idea of getting somebody from sort of the actual leadership space who are making policy and so on would be super interesting. I also, and this I mentioned this before the show started, so I won't open it up for others as well, which is, I think, the migrant crisis that we are seeing, whether it's in Ukraine or Syria, and that there is going to be more of that given sort of global climate change. So to me, that's one of the grand challenges that education is going to face. I think similarly, there would be the disruptions due to climate change. I think we need to think about education in a sustainable context. What does that mean? I think AI is going to have significantly transformative effects, positive and negative, just as we see with social media and so on. And so I'm wondering whether what would be some grand challenges that would be interesting for us to spend a series of 4 or 5 episodes on, and get some people who are experts in that domain. They may not necessarily be educators or educational innovators, but understand that space really well to help us think, because we have, between us and our guests, quite a bit of summative experience and thinking about education. But I think that might be interesting from our growth and development of our thinking, because I follow the news and I dig into some articles, but it's not in a systematic kind of way. And it'll be great to have a guest who would lay out for us, like, this is what people in the AI space or people who are looking at what's happening with migrants across the world, what are the challenges, what are we seeing coming up possibly in the future. And that might be useful, I think, Chris, from the point of view you're making, that how do we now think about these new models of education, because this is what the world of the future is going to look like. And so I wonder if there might be some future-facing global challenges kind of episodes that we could do, and get some really good people to come and talk to us about that.
I have a colleague, Professor Sarah Dryden-Peterson, who specializes in, displaced students. And could probably suggest some other guests that would be interesting.
Yeah, so I think that would be cool. I think getting somebody who thinks about the broader sort of issues, and we've talked about this before, philosophical and of technological change and its impact on how we think and how we work and interact. I think some episodes like that. And I'm going to put a question in the chat for our listeners, viewers, if they have other suggestions to make. It will be good to get a series of 4 and 5 episodes and then plan that coming up.
Well, one of the big challenges, we are all aware of, relates to what you and Chris are talking about, is undue schooling. We have last week, Peter and Michael talk about their way of doing schools, open 365 days, and the kind of 7-Eleven kind of school. But that's just one place. How like in front of all this crisis, all these different conflicts. How do we undo? We've been talking a lot about it, but at every time, if you read any policy documents, it's still teachers said, I want to make sure students learn this. Governments, I want to make sure students master this. Really, how does that matter? How much? Because that is the biggest challenge to say, how much does the curriculum matter? I was doing a talk for the Sydney Morning Herald conference online. And I really just if you have children versus the curriculum, and that curriculum is predefined, and they want all children to achieve that at the same time. So how do we undo and redo? I think that would be one of interesting challenges to say, like even your dean Punya were talking about the next generation of workforce, and that is amazing shift. But still within the context of schooling, right? But now we have students, let's say Ukrainian students, they're in Poland, they're in Romania, their teacher may be still in Ukraine. How do they organize, and how can we go back to this informal, self-sustained learning? I think will be really a huge challenge. And I don't know if Chris, Curt, and Punya, you guys have any great guests who can come to really talk about that massive shift of thinking.
Well, I'm going to just point out, I've been searching online here for it. Huron University in Germany offers free courses to refugees. In Germany, you have to wait a year to get into higher education once you move into the country, but they get around that through online universities. Huron, Kiron, is the first online university for refugees, which offers them a free higher education wherever they are in the world. It's launched in Germany, says that all the students need is a computer and internet connection. I wonder if maybe our friends at the Commonwealth of Learning would have a contact there. And, if I can get a name of someone we could invite from Huron to hear what's going on, that would be, and there might be other universities as well who are doing that. So I'll do some follow-up there and see what else I can dig up.
Another issue, that would be great, Curt, to contact. Another issue I think is this right now, the division. The schools, you heard from superintendents, really, they're not focusing on critical race theory. A few months ago, people were debating, school boards were debating about mask, about vaccination. We can get some local school board members to come to talk about, are they thinking long-term issues? Are they thinking about school transformation? Or are they really just debating, arguing the short-term things that may or may not have huge impact on students? I think, contacting school boards will be fun. And, Canada does not have school boards. Many countries do not have the same kind of school boards, but at least some of the schools have some kind of community representatives. We want to learn about their understanding of education. Where do they want to take their school? Or do they just want to fulfill the curriculum? Or are they thinking something different? But so that's another issue, we can think about. Punya?
Yeah, I think that's going to be interesting. I mean, both the policymakers and school board members, I'm not exactly sure that some of them would want to come on, and I don't know. That'd be interesting to see who we can get from there. But that doesn't mean that we cannot get members of people who are the school board association. I mean, there are school board associations who speak for school boards in general. I think they might be willing to come on and talk to us.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's I think that from after our 100th episode, we can move on to a broader discussion and definition of education. For the last 2 years, we've highlighted a lot of good innovations, a lot of small individual things. Even we want to support the push for more systematic changes, it might be interesting to have some broader conversations, and that may help us, to go where Punya and Chris, you guys were talking about the next generation of education. The four of us are always in the house of higher education, but we want to bring in the big changes in society and what do people see. Another area I don't know if you're interested in is the growing homeschoolers. We'd love to have some homeschool parents and the students just ready to come to talk about their experience. Of course, and there's many reasons for people to do homeschooling, but that is a trend that we need to understand what they do, why they do it, and how they do it, and how they're using online technology to support them in doing those kind of things.
Yeah, we did have, I think, was it last summer, where we had Peter Gray and Bria Bloom, who talked about the unschooling, and Bria being one who had sort of created her own undergraduate degree, which I thought was awesome. And that was a great episode, Yeah,
I was wondering, Chris or Curt, you guys have anything to jump in, to add?
Well, I'm kind of going back to where I began the episode by talking about the episodes themselves as a source for the field. And this summer, when I have a little bandwidth, I may go through the site and look for 4 or 5 episode chunks that could be put together and write maybe a little curriculum guide for each of them, like a 1 to 2 page curriculum guide. So the role of global nonprofits in advancing higher education. We have several episodes on that, and it could be put together into a nice guide. And of course, it can be customized by whoever is using it. Some episodes are so terrific that I couldn't edit them, but other episodes, I tell my students, will watch from minute 3 to, minute 19, and then come back again at minute 28 and watch the next 15 minutes or so. And so each person who's using an episode can decide which pieces of it are most valuable given their goals and their students. But I just think that we could move towards these chunks of episodes. And, if there was a certification provider, that wanted to offer micro-credentials, that could be interesting. I'm not looking to monetize this in any way or to formalize it, but I do think that it should be possible to get some kind of acknowledgement for viewing some of this material and synthesizing it together. So that's something that I'm planning to spend some time thinking about and would welcome others' thoughts about it.
Chris, you mentioned that I should bring this to the University of Kansas Global Online Academy. You heard our dean talk about that. And they are trying to create micro-credentials for teachers. And maybe they can utilize what we have, and to do that, I will contact them. I think that's a great idea. I never thought about it. No, I would just contact them since they're building a platform to do that.
So I think the similar thing, I think I had mentioned this before, that ASU is sort of reorienting itself around these 3 enterprises. So there is the academic enterprise, which are the degree programs. There is the knowledge enterprise, which is sort of the research, that R1 universities do, creating new knowledge. But the third one is what we are calling is the learning enterprise, which is basically the idea that ASU, it's sort of the similar global academy idea, but taking the whole university as being a part of that this is a critical piece that as an university and our commitment to the community and the society and the world that we live in, that we need to be thinking of education across the lifespan. So I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's a really intriguing idea. So that leads me to think of another session as Curt, you and Chris are thinking of using this in your classes, Curt, you in particular, I'm wondering whether that's a student assignment, which is watch a few episodes and identify these clips that you think connect together with some interpretation in between. And if somebody gives me the clips segments, I can edit the video. I can do it. If you tell me from this, because I don't have the time to sit and do the analysis because that's an investment. This is relatively mechanical work. That would be a really fun thing to do. So Chris, over summer, if you find 4 episodes and you say, Punya, here is a 5-minute clip from this guest, if I parallel that with a 6-minute clip from this one, we can actually tell a different kind of story, which is bigger than the episode in itself or the episodes in itself. That might be super interesting to do. And I think we have enough material now to be able to do that. So it's actually a question of time and bandwidth, really, than anything else. It'd be super easy to do. We have all the raw video files, and could be interesting. Could be super.
Yeah. I've been experimenting, and I've had students since the beginning reflect on the episodes. And as I mentioned a few weeks ago, this semester I had my students design an alternative syllabus, and it's pretty impressive what they put together. This week on computational thinking, but every week's been really great. And I'm thinking, well, what do I do with this new course, designing a new learning environments? And I could have students find episodes that could create the 15 weeks of the course through the different episodes that we've had, and then contact the people in charge who were interviewed in the episode for follow-ups. But yeah, you got me thinking. I think we'll do that in the fall, have them review different episodes and put together the time spans where interesting things are happening, and we could create kind of a mixed pod video of the best kind of. That would be really, really great. I mean, that might be a little promo too, a little teaser that we could put on the Silver Lining for Learning website, just like they do with movies, or with books these days. They have book teasers too.
You know what? One thing we do is we are very honest. That is, the 4 of us and the guests, we're very kind of honest, candid, hosts and guests, which you don't get in a lot of podcasting, a lot of promotional materials. Now, that is something quite actually amazing. So what I think will be very meaningful for all of us is to continue this push, but also highlight the themes which Punya has suggested many, many times, because we have very many different themes. One of the themes, of course, I've been promoting and advocating for is student autonomy, student driving the learning. I think when Chris talked about informal learning, when you were, young, you couldn't do this. I remember when I was kind of grow up in my little tiny village, I did not even have books. Most of my reading came from my father's noodle shop, who buys or used the books to wrap noodles. I better read them fast before they were gone. So and the multimedia I had was the loudspeaker the communist government wired, and I remember actually was picking up the wire trying to see if it's hollow. That's why the voice travels, which did not really work. Help me out. So I mean, think about. But now all my village have smartphones. It's unbelievable. So why don't they have their own schools? Why do they have to be subject to the government-controlled, standardized, centralized curriculum? Why don't they? It's just really interesting, so that's really, I would like to say more of not necessarily school-enabled, but self-enabled to say, forget about it. I am going to do this. So if our listeners, if our audience, anyone knows anybody who's really kind of saying, I'm studying my own way, I'm neglecting all this, I would like to see individuals do that. We've seen a lot of young entrepreneurs, young people, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, making their business, selling cookies, creating, YouTube videos, doing amazing things. But how about young learner as entrepreneurs? Say, I've done my own school. We've done this. I think that would be something fascinating to track. At least my two kids were not successful becoming their own learners. They went through school. I mean, I don't know about, other people.
So one other theme I'll bring up, like I suspect all of you, I continue to do a lot of speaking, even though I don't leave my house. And actually, I'm reaching audiences that I never would have reached because other than the time zones, you can speak just as easily now to an audience halfway around the world as you can to an audience in downtown Boston, 30 miles from where I live. So, and then I try to ask a week afterwards, if I know people who were at the speech, what ideas caught your attention, and how could I improve? And one of the interesting things to me is that an idea that I frequently use toward the end of a talk is I'll talk about students declaring a passion rather than declaring a major, or rather than declaring an occupation. So I've talked about my younger daughter who's graduating this year from Smith College as an engineer. Her passion is to help people in the global South who've been marginalized to have upward mobility and to improve their lives. Now, engineering is a useful tool for that, but the curriculum that you get for the passion is much broader than the curriculum that you get for engineering. And yet, in a way, it's much more targeted because there's lots of stuff you're learning in engineering that are not going to be useful if that's your particular passion. I think silver lining for learning is kind of a passion-driven repository as opposed to a discipline-driven repository. It's not like we say, well, qualitative research is important, so let's get in some people on qualitative research. No one who wants to change education should be able to move forward without knowing about qualitative research. It's not that kind of an approach. It's an approach that says, we're going to show you people who have passions. Maybe it's your passion, or maybe it will become your passion after you listen to them. And then their knowledge and skills give you a menu for what you might want to acquire. And I think that's part of the appeal of the show and part of the power of the show.
Chris, that gets me to think about something really interesting. Given the power, the time we devote to this, it's a lot of time. When we're given the communication, think about who to invite, how do we have this an hour, you always log in an hour and 15 minutes early. And it has to be a passion. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this for this long. Really, for us, it's a passion. And also, I was also thinking about how small an audience we have. I was really thinking about, we have a very small audience live, but we're doing this. So this is something. It's more like I can't imagine of running a TV show with this small audience without the passion. A lot of people who are commercial businesses, they do podcasts, they do all kinds of things. They have a little thing, but they can get a lot. They can reach a lot of people. So, but I'm very proud we have a very small audience. Actually, I'm very proud we are interested in doing what we are doing. And we are passionate about what we are talking about. I think that really gets me going. So I have to really comment on that piece. And because none of us actually spends a lot of time, or we don't have the talent probably promoting this. We don't have money to promote. We don't have all of those things. So this is a passion project. If it lasts for 10 years, God, that would be amazing. 15 would be even better. So think about that piece. I was thinking about running the show for half a year.
I'm hoping I'll last for 15 years. Yeah,
I know. It wasn't amazing, right? But now I kind of said, I don't know how long we'll run this thing. This is actually quite fascinating to think about.
Yeah, and I think yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So it's like Vin Bao, the guy who teaches special musical instrument in Vietnam. He passed away, I think, earlier this year at age 103. He was still teaching. We're 15 years from now, if we're still doing this. I think we have to, Young. I think we have to recognize the audience that we do have. It's small, but it's very smart. And Lydia made a comment here. I want to acknowledge her comment that she's thinking, well, we need parents. Thinking about parents, not only the stakeholders, but the innovators within education. Lydia, if you have specific parents that you have read about in the news that have made a difference in a school district, send them our way. We'd like to contact them. It'd be an interesting show. Dodzi, he's made a comment about MIT Open Learning with Krishna Raja Gopal, if I'm saying that right. I know I'm not. Punya can say it better than me. He's right. We haven't had a show where we've focused on what MIT is doing. They've been a leader for a couple of decades in this open learning space. It might be kind of interesting what they've learned and realized over the 2 decades that they've been a leader in the field of open education, in the open education, open courseware, and micro-credential MOOCs movement. Justin Reich has a book about all the issues or problems that technology hasn't solved, educational technology hasn't solved. I mean, he might be an interesting guest. I don't know. Do you know Justin, Chris? He worked at Harvard and at MIT. I think he'd be an excellent guest for us to have on the show.
Yeah, I know Justin.
Yeah, so between the two of us, we could contact him, maybe someone else who has more of a critical view of technology integration. John makes a great comment about inviting teachers who left the field of education early. And again, John, if you have people specific that you recommend to us, we jump on that too. So a lot of great comments from our guests, and we're appreciative of what you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think John's comment is slightly different. It's not teachers who left the profession; it's people who just dropped out of school, who just said no to the system. So this is sort of following up Zhao's comment. It's like, who are the people who created their own school? So to speak, their own curriculum, so to speak. They followed their passion, in Chris's terms, is I think what John is pointing to. So one of the things that I think, if I look back on these episodes around, we started with the focus on COVID. I think then we had a shift towards sort of the silver linings and people who are doing interesting work and so on. What I'm hearing, if there's a theme that's emerging here, is that the next series of the next phase of this is going to be looking at some of these big picture challenges and people who have been trying to address these challenges. So to me, that's sort of a natural shift. And I think part of what makes this program fun is because we don't have an agenda, we don't have a curriculum, so to speak. And so we can, through collectively, sort of figure out, okay, this is how we are curious about learning. So I think in some ways, to me, it rather than a passion project, I would call this a curiosity project. That this is something we want to learn more about.
Now, Punya, before the show started, you had an excellent kind of idea about the possible shows that we could have, some themes, some challenges, some global challenges. Before we run out of time, I would like you to lay those out so our audience that are there in YouTube could react to them. Could you lay those out? Because you did a really good job of that early on.
Oh, now you're asking me to remember what I said 45 minutes ago. That's increasingly difficult.
With a headache.
With a headache, no. No, I think I mentioned a few of them already. I think the migrant crisis is one. I think that it is symptomatic or emblematic of what many learners globally are going to be. Their learning contexts are going to be in that area, that kind of disruptions. So to me, that's a big one. I think issues around sustainability, particularly with global climate change and the issues that are coming with that, what implications that has. I think AI is going to be, this is what's crazy, right? Like now, Zhao, just you said that everybody, like countries like Bangladesh, places like your village leapfrogged from like 1940 to 2020 in one, in the period of 10 years, right? Like everybody has a smartphone now. Now, what that means is we have companies and organizations which are massive troves of data, which can be used for machine learning and AI algorithms, right? So we are going to see a burst of that. So it's not going to be that AI is going to happen in some corner and then will gradually percolate around the world. It's going to come into the world within 5 years. It's going to be, everybody will have, we already do, right? In our smartphones, we have those things happening already. So I think that's one. We'd love to get somebody who does work in that space, whose job is to think about the future of AI, the pluses and the minuses. And it's for us to bring the education perspective to it. I think those could be some very fascinating conversations.
Well, I just want to add one more. I really think about education and brainwashing. You know, we didn't really talk much about that. It's some education systems are simply brainwashing students, brainwashing people. They get rid of their phones. They cannot access. You only listen to this. You know what's brainwash? Brainwashing basically is you're only allowed to one type of information, however that information is. And this is the 21st century. Unless we have children truly exposed, we're going to have very divided humanity. So I really hope we can address, and it is shocking, right? I mean, dictatorship, it seems to be more appealing to some people than democracy, because democracy looks like messy, you know, all those things. I know maybe Curt and Chris, you guys grew up in the US, you may not have experienced the kind of things that, you know, we've seen in other places. I really think that that is a significant part of education. Education is about liberation. It is not about brainwashing. And how we in the 21st century can do that. Without that, I'm not buying any mask of Elon Musk, so I'm not buying masks, but I'm very pleased to see Starlink dropped, you know, an internet connection in Ukraine, you know, for example. That kind of access is different. So how do we bring information? At the same time, I mean, even in American schools, we have curriculum which seems to be brainwashing. We have different states that try to teach different things, all those things. So the idea of allowing students to have free access to do learning, following their heart or following what's we think reasonable, is actually being constrained and limited by authorities. So how do we change that? That is another significant challenge. I'm not saying the all of us can have the power to change them, but we can at least bring discussions about that.
So now keep in mind that Chris and I didn't just grow up in the same country. We spent our primary and high school years in the same city. We're both from Milwaukee, which was known for having a socialist mayor at the time. And so, yeah, I just point that out.
That it might be really good to get somebody who, I mean, these are not new debates, right, Zhao?
No,
right?
No.
So it might be interesting to get somebody who does sort of the history and philosophy of education, but has a forward-looking view on it, right? I mean, is not just sort of studying it because it is there, but saying like, what implications does this have for us as we step into this weird future, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem, Punya, is that when we talk about education, we seldom question what we're teaching. We always, how do you learn better? How do you teach better? But teach what better? You know?
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. No, I get it. And I think there are people who would be interesting to have there. And I think there's a shift. So I think I'm suggesting a shift for at least some of our episodes to not necessarily get people who are experts in a domain and education, but to get people who are experts in a particular domain. And then for us to engage in a conversation. So if we have a philosopher of education who speaks to this tension between indoctrination versus democracy versus liberation and how this has played out, I think we can then become part of the respondents in that conversation, right? So that's another possible way of, excuse me, thinking about future episodes.
Well, I was wondering, Chris, Harvard seems to have a collection of all kinds of people. Is there any Harvard scholar that you're aware of who does this kind of things we could invite?
Let me think about that. No one comes to mind offhand, but
yeah,
let me think about that.
I have a close colleague, Sherman Dorn, who's a historian of education. I can talk to him. I mean, he is interesting in and of himself and his perspectives and so on. But he might also have other ideas. But to me, it could be fun to have that kind of conversation where it's actually a dialogue, right? We are trying to figure it out. It's like scratching that curiosity itch, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, education history and education philosophy have not been talked about. They're really dying subjects in schools of education because, but I think, if you trace any history of education or philosophy of education, there's a lot of things that we need to debate on. Especially like what kind of kids we prepare. I mean, right now, nowadays, we pretend we know. We got standards, reading and math. But really, I think we've lost the hope to say education is not only prepare people to do the job, but it's to really prepare the future generations of humanity. That they really bear responsibility to carry on. We are going to die, but they will live much longer than we do. I'm hoping out of school, they'll become better human beings. That's what, I was thinking about. Punya, yeah, if you can contact, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll connect with Sherman.
Curt?
I'm just pointing out, we have 1 minute left before I introduce the next show. Does anyone have a final comment or something they'd like to say?
Well, I just wanted to comment. I got too excited today because I've been so distracted by various things. I mean, you probably won't understand this because it's unbelievable. China is returning many cities to really 2020. It's because this Omicron is just going through a lot of places. They've fired a lot of local government officials, but that's of course not going to stop Omicron. So I'm looking at that, kids going online, schools closed. Then of course, seeing the online teaching in Ukraine, that really touches me. I'm going to dig some into news, see if I can find anyone who can be on our show. That'll be wonderful.
And I think we should have a show on Ukrainian education or alternatives and what's going on. A couple of shows, in fact. It might even be a theme of a month long. And I'm very interested in that. And I'd like to help you out. If you take the lead on that, Young, I'm sure we would all get right behind you or ahead of you on that, because it's a very interesting, important. Maybe our audience as well might have some suggestions there, might have contacts in Ukraine or Ukrainian nationals or expats in the US. Episode 98, though, has got to be introduced. And the title of that one is Authentic Project-Based Learning in Science, Using Urban Farms and Tire Gardens as Mind Tools. So I'll have Simon McMillan from the South Island of New Zealand come to talk to us about urban farms, urban concept farms. And we will have Sutapa Mukund from the North Island, from Auckland, talk to us about tire gardens and hydroponics and other kinds of things. Now, I think she's taken a new position within New Zealand recently and is a national assessment facilitator in New Zealand. Simon's at head of science at Kakori Valley College in Dunedin, New Zealand. So it'll be a fascinating show. And both of them have chapters in my new book, Transformative Teaching Around the World, with stories from people around the world, 22 different countries. And so that's two of them, one from the North, one from the South. It should be interesting. They're both fascinating people. So I look forward to the show, and I hope to all see you up next time.